Ladies and gentlemen, President Trump has just pulled off what is perhaps the single most ingenious political maneuver of all time. And this time, as it would seem, some of the far left justices currently sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court have just walked into President Trump's trap. Now, folks, frankly, this is a very complex situation. So we're going to break all of this down today, step by step, so everyone really understands what has gone on here. But I'm not joking when I say this. President Trump has pretty much just played these far left justices on the Supreme Court like a fiddle. So let's get right into this. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the big breaking news of the day. A couple hours ago, earlier this morning, in a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court struck down President Trump's IEEPA trade tariffs, saying that President Trump cannot use the IEEPA to mandate these sort of tariffs. Okay, well, what does that mean? The IEEPA stands for the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And it was through this act's legal framework that President Trump, starting back in April of 2025, Liberation Day, as he called it, it's through this IEEPA framework that President Trump has applied roughly 70% of his tariffs over the last year or so. The other 30% of his tariffs, however, his most important tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, lumber, automobile, and industrial manufacturing components, well, these more important tariffs were filed through a different legal framework through a series of other congressionally passed acts. And the reason why Trump levied these very important tariffs through a different legal framework is because these are in our nation's best national security interests, and they are. So he used a different legal framework. And I say this, I explain this dynamic here because it is actually very important to what is going on today. Take a look at this. Today's Supreme Court ruling is actually relatively narrow. What it does is it strikes down only the tariffs, only President Trump's tariffs that have been imposed under this IEEPA, but it does not even mention whether or not these former IEEPA tariffs can be reapplied under these alternative legal frameworks that President Trump has already been using for the other 30% of his tariffs. So right now, what seems to be the case is that Trump, he's not allowed to use the IEEPA for these 70% of his tariffs, but now he can just move them over and reapply all of them immediately under a different, more robust legal framework. That seems to be what's happening here. Now, here's the deal. These other legal frameworks that Trump can use to reimplement these tariffs, well, they are literally bulletproof. They've already been litigated in the lower courts as well as in the past in the Supreme Court hundreds, thousands of times over the last couple decades. All President Trump has to do in order to work through these legal frameworks to apply these tariffs is to determine that a foreign import that Trump wants to tariff or place a tariff on poses a national security threat in some way, and bada bing, he can then impose a tariff on it.